All right, I want to talk about thieves, which are also known as rogues or specialists. Now, this was not in the original Dungeons and Dragons, but in one of the early supplements, Greyhawk, it introduced the thief class. Now, the thief class had several abilities. They could pick pockets, they could open locks, they could find and remove traps, move silently, hide shadows, hear noise, climb walls, and when they got higher level, they could read languages, and they could do sneak attacks, backstabs that did double damage. Now, before this class was introduced, all characters were doing these things. The idea of the thief class, which really should have been called the dungeon crawler class, because these are all things that are useful in the dungeon. The idea of the thief class was that the thief was better at doing these things than other characters. So, for example, a fighter could hide behind a pillar, and when the orc goes by, he could jump out and stab the orc in the back. So, and so he'd have to roll for surprise to see if he surprised the orc, but he could still do that. So, when I educate these in game, I try to make it so that, for example, moving silently, you would have to roll your chance, and if you fail, you'd still get to roll for surprise just like any other character. And hide in shadows is not your chance to hide behind the pillar like a fighter. You can hide behind the pillar and you don't have to roll for that. Hide in shadows is like flattening yourself against the wall and not being seen as the orc walks by. You're there in plain sight, but you're making yourself flat, you're in the shadows, so he doesn't notice you. So, you roll for hide in shadows, and if you fail it, then you still get to roll for surprise. Another thing about Thieves' abilities is the player should not roll most of these unless it's obvious to the player what happened, like climb walls. So, these are mostly rolled behind the screen by the Dungeon Master. Now, you can roll different dice for this. In 2nd edition, all these skills are rolled on a 20-sided die. And the difference between each die is 5% difference. So it's in 5% increments. Now, in 1st edition, it was on a percentile basis. Same with 2nd edition. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was always on a percentile basis. And this made it much easier to make minute adjustments in it. You could have like some special shoes that gave you a 3% advantage on move silently. If you look at the numbers, but some of these numbers were really low. Like your chance of moving silently is only 15%. That's such a small chance you might as not even try. So, hear noise, only 10%. So, yeah, the chances of it were too low. So, when 2nd edition came out, let's go on. So, yeah, the chances were too low, so players would try to buff this by playing a non-human. Non-humans had bonuses and minuses on certain thief skills. So, depending on which thief skill you wanted to use, you would pick that particular race because it had a high bonus. And if you had a high dexterity, that'd give you even more bonus. So halflings had the most bonuses, so those were picked a lot to be thieves. Which is funny because in original Dungeons and Dragons, they'd been a various and a fighter. So in 2nd edition, they came up with this idea that every character has a base amount of their chance to do these different skills. And you have the racial adjustments, depending on which race you are, they get better at them. And Unearthed Arcana had introduced armor adjustments. So if you decide not to wear armor, or if you wear a little bit heavier armor, you can get better or worse at your skills. So that's another way of buffing it. And here's the dexterity modifiers for them. So you had all these modifiers, and you had 60 percentage points that you could spend to improve these skills. So this allowed you to put, and you could put up to 30 points in one ability at first level. So this allowed you to be really good at 2 skills from the beginning, and the rest you wouldn't be so good at. So that worked a lot better for the players. For the DM, it made it a little bit more complex because you never knew how good a particular player's thief would be unless you looked at the character sheet and made a note that, oh, this one's really good at hiding, this one's good at picking locks. You never knew. Well, in first edition, it was a lot easier because it's a flat rate for everything. And if you look at climbing, it's got decimals beyond 90. So that's another thing about second edition. These abilities topped off at 95% in second edition, while they went up to 99% in everything except climbing, which went into 3 digits. And this is partially because climbing slick surfaces and overhangs and things like that increased your chances of falling. So it would actually, even if you're 99.3%, if the chance of falling is 10 times what it normally would be, that would knock you down to 97% chance. So that's why it's set that way. So in Lamentations, the Thieves' abilities are 1 in 6 that everybody can do, and the thief gets 4 points that he can add to this chance that's first level. And the skills are a little different too, but let's just talk about the chances to do these skills. So it was playing Mazes and Minotaurs that really opened my eyes to the fact that a first level thief ought to have a halfway decent chance to do any skill. They ought to be good at being a thief, and then when they get to be high level, they should be amazing. Because Mazes, Minotaurs, Thieves are like mid-level thieves starting at first level. Now when they get to be higher level, they become really amazing. And another thing about Mazes and Minotaurs is that the target number for a lot of the thief skills was your encumbrance. So the thief would shed as much encumbrance as he could so that he could have a really easy to hit number. Now, so this made me, as a house rule, decide that first level thieves should get 12 points to start off with. This gives them the ability to make climbing about as good as it is in first edition, and add a point to each ability. So the abilities that are in the book, which let's get it to focus, are Architecture, Bushcraft, Climb, Languages, Search, Sleight of Hand, Sneak Attack, Stealth, and Tinker. Now, Move Silently and Hide in Shadows have been combined into one ability called Stealth. That's a little simpler, and that makes more sense. Sleight of Hand is picking pockets and other similar activities. Search can be used to find traps or hear noise or other things. Languages is the ability, the default setting for Lamentations is Europe. So there's a chance that you know the languages of other people you met in Europe. So this is your chance that you might know this other language. Climbing is climbing. Now, Bushcraft is the ranger skills, but the halflings are good at this too. So it's like the halfling ranger skills, and Architecture is like the dwarf skills. So one of my house rules is I interpret Architecture to mean that dwarves can detect architectural type traps like hidden trapdoors in the floor, sliding walls, things like that. And they can use it to climb walls that are made out of blocks, brick walls or stone walls with mortar. And bushcraft, I allow it to be used for stealth in the wilderness and for climbing trees and tracking and things like that. So this makes dwarves and halflings sort of half thieves, but not quite. The sneak attack one, it's not gaining 1 to 6 on sneak attack, it's gaining multiplier. So you start off, a sneak attack does normal damage. If you add a point, it does double damage. If you add another, it does triple damage, and so forth. One person has house ruled that these abilities should be in D12s because that makes a more range, but I like the simplicity of a D6, and the book Veins of the Earth has a lot of modifiers for climbing based on a D6, so it's a lot easier not to have to do the math and just do a D6, but each number on a D6 represents a 16.6% chance. Well, that's a big leap from 1 in 6 to 2 in 6. So I really like the percentage is better, except it's simpler just to roll a D6. So that's my spiel on Thieves.